In this passage, Guthrie takes a rather traditional line of American protest that selfish interests were blocking the Jeffersonian pursuit of happiness. Guthrie also addressed basic issues of health care in a column reporting that his family was expecting a baby. The singer understood that doctors, like everyone else, had to make a living, but he simply could not comprehend any way that a physician could charge as much for his service as one night delivering a baby as a working man earned in 6 months of laboring. Guthrie contemplated, funny, how one feller could hit a few licks of some sort of inspired work, like a doctor or a lawyer, and take all the inspiration out of you for a year. Celebrating the dignity and worth of all labor, Guthrie, in his unique way, appeared to call for a system of universal health care, writing, I believe in a government wholesale price on babies, delivered to your home because they double the pressure, triple the increase, and quadruple the price at the hospital. During the summer of 1949, before the signing of the Hitler-Stalin Non-Aggression Pact in August, Guthrie supported the re-election of Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. Guthrie continued to denounce those exploiting the common people, but he appeared to tone down his rhetoric a bit, providing a less incendiary or revolutionary approach to the political and economic crisis of capitalism in the United States. Instead, Guthrie returned to extolling the virtues of the migrants and the poor. On July 7th, he discussed his comfort level when walking down Skid Row in Los Angeles, asserting that he trusted hobos more than the play folks that populate our banks and hotels. In another piece about the migrants, Guthrie maintained that they were honest and true because they were forced to live in a state of nature with few possessions and empty bellies. Guthrie proclaimed, you land shirks and other friskers, listen to me. The hungrier you make us, the wiser we get. Because all of the good books on religion advise you to fast and think. And the fastest you can think is when you're right hungry. And I'll just kind of skip over this part very quickly. He also, of course, supported John Steinbeck in The Grapes of Wrath, but he pointed out that the book was a little too expensive for his people, and besides, they didn't need to read the book, they were getting the experience directly. As Guthrie reaffirmed his faith in the people, he also continued to defend the Communist Party and its supporters. On July 17, 1939, he reported that former party member John Leach was testifying before the House Un-American Activities Committee and denouncing communism. Guthrie labeled Leach as a Judas figure, observing that that's the way it was when they nailed the carpenter to the cross. They took the word of the folks that didn't know anything about him, and then a feller named Judas that deserted his party sold out his teacher and his own soul for about 30 hunks of silver. Guthrie also used Christian imagery in both his music and writings. When Guthrie was a young boy, the Socialist Party was an important political force in Oklahoma. However, the party in the Southwest did not champion a materialistic atheism. Instead, the socialist tradition in states such as Oklahoma embraced a millennial Christian tradition in which the meek would inherit the earth. Accordingly, the Socialist Party often did well in areas where such Pentecostal groups as the Church of Christ enjoyed popular support. While Guthrie may have been a Red, he was certainly no atheist, maintaining a faith in Christian socialism led by a plain-speaking working-class carpenter who was opposed to vested economic and political interests. This somewhat simplistic belief in a Christian socialism allowed Guthrie to avoid the doctrinal disputes between socialists and communists. Woody's paradise was an America where the common people could find fulfilling work and be free from exploitation. Guthrie placed little faith in organized religion. Instead, he believed in the millennial return of the working-class carpenter who would bring peace, equality, and justice to the world. The folk singer envisioned an earthly paradise in which, should the Master appear again on earth, that he would take a look at the churches, a look at the sinners, and associate himself at once with the sinners, as he did before. Religion is to forget yourself and work for the good of others. Outside of that, there is no religion, no progress, no hope for you, your neighbor, your common grandchildren. Find out who is causing the trouble here in this old world. Remove the power from their hands, place it in the hands of those who ain't greedy, and you can roll over and go back to sleep. Guthrie was more interested in ends than means. And if the Communist Party would usher in the Commonwealth of Equality called for by the Prince of Peace, then so be it. When the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, followed by the invasion of Poland in September 1st, 1939, it was a difficult time to be a communist. Nevertheless, Guthrie would not repudiate his leftist sympathies and increasingly focus his attention on questions of war and peace in his writing. Guthrie wrote about the impact of war in Europe on the children, and he endorsed the Soviet policy of perceiving World War II as a capitalist conflict. He observed, "See where Hitler is going to jump on the women and children too, and everybody else says, if you jump on them, we'll jump on them too, which makes it look like they're going to all get jumped on." A few days later, Guthrie found the origins of the war to lie in the private ownership of scarce resources. He lamented, "Some war seems like they're fighting to see who owns what. Well, if the country belonged to everybody until they couldn't fight no more, we wouldn't have wars." War would be a problem as long as civilization was based on the profit system. In support of peace, Guthrie urged workers who were strapped financially to donate a day's pay to maintain the people's daily worker as one of the few voices against war and fascism. Taking on the persona of his new son Bill, Guthrie wrote, "But by the time I grow up to be a man, I want this old world to be, by damn, the people's world. Not just some choice few, but a world of working people, of the working world." Although in late 1939 the Woody Says columns were focusing upon issues of war and peace, Guthrie continued to rail against the exploitation of the working people by big business and profiteers, while calling for a more collectivist future. He envisioned the United States as one big union where everyone would join, concluding, "Now if you and me and everybody all belong to the same big union, and then the union was to guarantee you a job all the time, why heck, we could all be richer than we are by a dang sight." And Guthrie persisted in his depiction of Jesus Christ as a model for organizing the people to drive the money changers and capitalists from Wall Street. He concluded, "Today we need to make a whip of small organizations and small movements and bind them and wind them into one big whoop and drive not only the money-changing ideas and thoughts out of our own minds and our bodies, our bodily temples, but also to drive the money changers out of the temple of our nation." John Steinbeck, much admired by Guthrie, tapped these similar sentiments, of course, with Jim Casey and the Grapes of Wrath. While embracing the collectivist vision, Guthrie was also unable to abandon his admiration for social outlaws. In an October column, he provided a rousing film review of Jesse James, featuring Henry Fonda in the title role. Guthrie praised Frank and Jesse James as victims of the railroads who hired hoodlums to drive the farmers off their land. Even though the railroads bombed their home and killed their mother, the James brothers continued to fight the corrupt railroad interests. Guthrie insisted, "No wonder folks like to hear songs about the outlaws. They're wrong, all right, but not as dirty and sneaky as some of our so-called higher-ups." Guthrie, however, remained an activist, not a film critic. He warned California vigilantes to polish up your balls and chains, for he was a-coming to the cotton fields to monitor the progress of the cotton strike. In another column, however, Guthrie indicated he was getting restless in California, speculating whereas the dirtiest of the Dust Bowlers, he might migrate to where he might migrate to next. On January 7, 1940, Guthrie wrote his final Woody Says column for the People's Daily World. As usual, Guthrie did not bid farewell to all his readers, friends, or family. Guthrie's adherence to the Communist Party line following the Nazi-Soviet pact resulted in a parting of the ways between the radical folk singer and progressive radio station owner Frank Burke. With nothing to hold him in California and restless once again, Guthrie deposited his wife and children in Pampa before he had headed toward a new promised land for migrants of the world, New York City. A close reading of the Woody Says columns in the People's Daily World provides ample evidence that the California years of the late 1930s were a crucial period in which Guthrie investigated the living conditions of the Dust Bowl refugees and formulated a radical hybrid political ideology which incorporated elements of Christian socialism, social banditry, populism, Jeffersonianism, collectivism, communism, and the ideology of the Communist Party. The What He Says columns for the People's Daily World illuminate the complexity of Guthrie's radicalism. Guthrie's vision of a better world for all of God's children attempted to fuse elements of traditional American radicalism with Marxism. At times, Guthrie's adherence to the Communist Party made him appear as a dupe to some. On the other hand, one wonders if it's not the party using Guthrie, but the other way around, Guthrie using the party. But in his celebration of the common people and the promise of the American life, Guthrie was very much a traditional left-wing American populist. In the final analysis, Guthrie found room for Christianity, communism, populism, and Jeffersonianism in his own popular front fighting for social justice during the 1930s. Thank you.